Our next subject is MIS. And the scope of MIS in orthopedics is already very large. It's increasing. This is the fastest growing sector. But are there some MIS markets we are missing? Can we benefit from looking at minimally invasive surgery in a broader context? To help us tackle that question is a speaker that I am just so excited to hear. He's Earl Fender. He's the third, by the way, J&J alumnus on this call. Past president of Vertiflex, and he has a very interesting case study to share and thoughts about those questions. Earl?
Thanks, Robin. Good to be with you guys. So I want to use Vertiflex, the company that I'm just about to leave, as a case study. Vertiflex is a 14-year-old company that's been venture-backed and has as its main therapy an MIS interspinous spacer. This is a market that has about 6 million patients in the United States who have the same symptoms as would overlay our technology. And the hallmark of the company has been an 8-year, $50 million IDE study, which Glenn Steidman happily helped us turn into a PMA. And then Vertiflex was acquired by Boston Scientific this past June. So there are a couple of takeaways that I would like you to get from this brief talk. First, that MIS technologies or products can indeed expand provider specialties, expand your customer base. The second thing is that companies like ours have the responsibility to ensure that all providers, regardless of who they are, what type of specialty they are in the best position and are the best qualified to ensure that patient interests are well taken care of. And then anytime you expand a provider base, a customer base, you might run into some politics. And so I'll talk for a moment about how one might think about mitigating those. So Vertiflex, here's the story of Vertiflex. It was intended to be, it's 14 years old, I came 12 years ago, and it was intended to be an MIS spine company. I ran J&J's DePuy Spine business. I'm a spine guy. But we started the first year of our IDE enrollment, and as I said, it was an 8-year trial. Enrollment took 3.5 years, and it was a non-inferiority trial against X-Stop, which was the only approved device at the time, and it had a high revenue level. And about 1 year into enrollment, X-Stop sales started to decline quickly. And the feedback that I was getting from spine buddies around the country and some of the spine surgeons in our IDE trial was that we could bring this to market, but they would never use it. And I thought, I'm about to do the most expensive large trial ever done and bring to market a product the world doesn't want anymore. And so I started to think and scramble. And I started to think about interventional pain management doctors. These are the guys that are doing spinal cord stims and ablation and drug pumps and so forth. And while those don't bear any resemblance to stenosis, technically, from point of care, ASCs, for example, there was a lot of similarities. So I brought about 40 of those guys to our home office and started to assess whether they could do this type of therapy that was the Vertiflex procedure. Long story short, they could. We put them in the IDE trial, and lo and behold, their results for both safety and efficacy were the same at the end of the trial. And I knew that if spine surgeons weren't going to end up being my customer, I would have one that would. Almost immediately, we got our approval, PMA approval in 2015 and Category 1 reimbursement same year. In 2016, we started to commercialize almost exclusively with pain docs, and immediately spine surgeons pushed back. There's some entertaining stories I could tell you, but let's just say that for the better part of a year, I had quite the battles on my hand to calm that down. But what I said to the spine surgeons, we had spent $170 million to bring this technology to market. The data was extraordinary, and patients needed this. And I wasn't going to leave it on the shelf. And if spine surgeons weren't going to use it, I had to find a different way. Pain management was one of those ways. Now, about 20% of our business today comes from spine surgeons, and that's a growing percentage. That's good. But we carefully select these interventional pain docs. They're fellowship trained. They are not the so-called needle jockeys. They are doing these other procedures. And so we've selected them carefully. We've trained them carefully. And we have fostered collaboration with spine surgeons in the marketplace, in the individual communities. This generally is a different patient, an earlier stage patient, than the one the spine surgeon would treat with laminectomy or fusion. And once that is clear, the political battles, the turf wars go down somewhat. But in fact, it's not a lot different than cardiology and interventional cardiology of many years ago. The data matters. I mentioned that we have 5-year IDE data, 80% success rate, successes with 90% patient satisfaction. We've chosen to do 2 registries tracking 4,000 patients, most of that commercially done by pain doctors, with the same or better outcomes, because you learn how to use these technologies over time. So the outcomes in the registries are actually better, and because they're doing mostly, being done mostly by pain docs, it's taken away some of that stigma. I think that, you know, I could go on about this, but what I would say is that having 2 groups of customers on one hand is challenging. It's important we take the responsibility to make sure the pain doctors are well trained and are competent to do MIS spine surgery. But note that it also expanded the number of acquisition targets. I guess we could have been bought by a traditional spine company, but who would have thought Boston Scientific would have bought a spine company? And yet this fits wonderfully into their pain management franchise, which fits into the neuromodulation segment of Boston's business. And I think this is really good for patients. And so it will give patients more access. And with the resources of a Boston Scientific, patients will be better cared for, lots of marketing to bring them into sites of care and so forth. So I think that's our story, and I'll stop for now. But Robin, I thank you very much for the willingness to hear this story, and maybe it'll shed some light on some of your own business.